Welcome to everybody who's joining us for this Global Wisdom Community broadcast. And as you come in, go ahead and share where you're tuning in from. To activate the chat, you just need to take your cursor, scroll down to the bottom of your page and click on chat. And that will pull up the chat bar, and then you can type in where you're calling in from. We'd love to hear. So welcome to everybody as you're tuning in. So far we have 40 of us on the call. Welcome. So welcome to Scooter from Canyon Lake, Texas. Sue from Toronto, Joanne from Toronto, Mark from Austin, Teresa from San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome. So for those of you that are just joining, welcome to the Wisdom Global Community Call. We're so glad to have you here on our monthly first Saturday of the month call. And as we're gathering our circle from all over the place, and there I am on the other computer. Just take a moment to go into your chat and share where you're tuning in from. And that chat, if you take your cursor, drag it to the bottom of your page, click on chat, you'll be able to see the chat bar. Welcome to Shauna from British Columbia, Shelley from Sacramento, Leah from Oakland, Lynette from San Antonio. Hi, Jody, who's with Mark. Beautiful. North Carolina. Beautiful. Good. So let's start by just creating a connection between all of us. So if you'll close your eyes and taking a breath into your belly. And imagine that we're in a circle holding hands across time and space and distance. And that we come together with our hearts to open, to listen, to learn, and to rest into each other so that we may take the best action possible as we move in the world. And let's also, into this circle, call in our ancestors, call in the ones that have walked before us, that have nurtured and cared for the land, to ask them to join the circle to remind us how to be in right harmony with nature, with our community, with ourselves. So into the circle we call the ancient ones and ask for their guidance and their blessing. And keeping your eyes closed, I want to invite Judith to sing into our circle a welcome song, whatever song feels right to you. And everyone, with your eyes closed, just really take in the song.
Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother, I feel your heartbeat. Mother, I feel you under my feet. Mother, I feel your heartbeat. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Mother, we feel you under our feet. Mother, we feel your heartbeat. Mother, we feel you under our feet. Mother, we feel your heartbeat. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Hey-ya, 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 hey-ya. Oh.
Oh, thank you. Mute the computer. So I really want to welcome Osprey for joining us today. And thank you, Will, for holding the container for this circle so beautifully. Will's going to be our first responder today. But I want to open up our call by inviting Osprey to share a little bit about who she is and also specifically Osprey, what was a moment in your life where you felt yourself becoming a climate activist, which is what your beauty is in the world? What was the experience that really catapulted you into that role and holding that strong center? And do you feel like that your foundation is from spirit, from a spiritual base, or from more a practical base? So give us a little bit of flavor of your love in the world.
Well, first of all, I just want to say hello to everyone. I see people from across the country and up in Canada, it looks like, as well. And I'm here in California on a lonely land. Want to honor the ancestors here from the land where I'm now located. And thank you, Heather and Judith and Will, for inviting me onto this call. So, you know, I think one of the things that would be really great to explore today on this call is, you know, we're in such an incredible moment. And I think that people realize that. And how do we really stay focused and grounded in such a powerful historical time that really presents us with an existential crisis as human beings? I grew up not too far from here, actually about 4 hours north. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I grew up in the town of Mendocino, which some of you might know is a small coastal town. And it was an incredible place to live, just such beauty. So I think the most important part is to say, you know, that I think a lot of my deep love for Mother Earth and dedication to caring for our planet, caring for people, is based on the beauty of the land herself, and how much I was moved by watching whale migrations when I was growing up, and being in the redwoods. I cut my teeth on activism, doing work to protect the old growth redwood forests up in the region where I live. If you're not familiar with the redwood trees, they're incredibly beautiful. I consider them my first teachers. They're giant trees, the most tall trees in the world. And they're really magnificent. And when you're inside the redwood forest, there's a certain kind of silence there. They're so tall and their umbra is so large that you can be deep in the old growth forest and not see the sky. There's so much tree. And there's sort of like this luminescent blue light that is very deep and very quiet. And it's from that place that I often go to, whether physically or in my imagination, to really pull from what the ancestors are asking us to do at this time, and to listen to what the land is saying. So, you know, I've been involved with many different aspects of what we can do about this time we live in, and how can human beings really live in harmony with each other and Mother Earth, I think is the big pressing question of our time. I don't think we're doing such a terrific job at the moment. So we have a lot of work to do. And I got into, you know, doing environmental work for many years. I've also been an artist. I wrote a book called Uprisings for the Earth, Reconnecting Culture with Nature, that really has to do with how do we revitalize our connection with Mother Earth, with the land in our modern context. And it's a series of journeys and intellectual conversations around that topic. But somewhere around 2009, when there was the big, some of you might remember, the big climate negotiations in Copenhagen. And every year, the United Nations holds United Nations conference on climate change. And it's an opportunity for all the world governments to get together, as well as civil society, to come and discuss what we're going to do about the climate crisis. And 2009 was going to be the big year, and it ended up being, you know, just short of a disaster, let's say. And I was walking in the redwood forests a couple months after that, and really contemplating, you know, what I wanted to do in terms of participating in that situation. And when I went into the forest, you know, instead of sort of this deep quiet that I have been very accustomed to, I had this sensation of this deep crying out, a very painful crying out. and that the web of life was at stake. Just this sense of the connective tissue being very disturbed. And I knew in that moment that I was going to completely stop everything I was doing, which I did. And that's when I began the first sort of seeds of building the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, We Can International, which is the organization that I now am the executive director of, and have some really wonderful allies that work in our organization with us. And really decided that, it was a time to engage. It was time to engage. So that really began my journey.
Around where there's been incredible awareness around climate activism and people really recognizing that action needs to be taken. And now we're in a cycle where we have a president that doesn't even believe in climate change. So how have you stayed steady with yourself? Have you been able to stay hopeful in this time? And how are you helping to hold your community through what we're stepping into right now?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and I think this conversation is based on extremes. I think that we are in an extreme moment of, I think it is absolutely essential to not shy away from the fact that we're in an incredibly precarious and dangerous situation. We already were before we had this new administration come into office. We are already in an extremely precarious situation, and our work was laid out for us bigger than any of us in the movement could handle. We now have put ourselves in an accelerated situation that takes enormous strategic thinking, planning, and really doubling down on everything that we already knew we needed to do. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but the other extreme that I'm sure your community has also discussed is that we are, now that we have moved from just, traditionally what we consider frontline communities being with their backs up against the wall, facing very serious situations in their community, life and death situation, health issues, immigration issues. We are now in a situation in which many, many, many more people are realizing the danger that we're in. And we know since the election that the participation by people in the United States and around the world, but let's just focus on the US for a moment, has changed tremendously. Some of you might have been participating in the march, the Women's March on Washington, right after inauguration. I was there in Washington, D.C. And I mean, it was extraordinary. There was over 1 million women marching on the streets, and men, of course, with us. There were sister marches across the country, around the world, and it was stated as the largest demonstration ever after a presidential election. I mean, that's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. People suddenly got super activated. So there's a lot of hope in the fact of this activation. I've participated in a lot of demonstrations. I've never been in one in which probably at least half the people I've talked to, women and men alike, said they have never marched in their life. And we're talking from grandmas in wheelchairs to, mothers bringing their young ones out on the streets saying, no, we don't agree with this administration, and we are standing up for women's rights and many, many, many other issues all in that one day. So I think that's really very exciting. We saw, what was it, a week or 10 days later, everyone racing to the airports to protest the immigration laws, very spontaneously all across the country. So we're seeing the rise of this incredible resistance movement. At the same time, you look at the news every day and you wonder, what world are we living in? How can this possibly get any worse? And every day there just seems to be more stacking up. Everything from the cabinet appointees who don't believe in climate change, who are actually, from the EPA to the head of state, looking at destroying the very positions that they're in. So I think it's really incredible to observe the level of destruction that is happening from the highest offices in our country. And the departments that they're supposed to be running are ones that they've been opposing or are actively trying to dismantle. So I don't think it can get much more insane than that. So I think that we really need to be very realistic about how awake we need to be. And I think that's probably one of the strongest things I'd like to emphasize today, because I've been in a lot of dialogues with many different movement leaders, not just in the United States, but in countries around the world who are already and have been living in oppressive governments for a really long time. And some of the key takeaway points that they have shared with us is, one, do not let there be any normalcy to this administration. Do not ever let ourselves be complacent and normalize basically the lack of adherence to the rule of law, as an example, or the kind of language or narratives that are being expressed, that we must resist at every moment the narratives and ensuring that we don't normalize the situation whatsoever. Not to mention that we don't even know if this was a legitimate presidency and a legitimate election, where all that is up in the air right at this very moment, as we know from the unraveling now of the connections with the administration and Russia. So, we'll see in the next weeks, months, what will unfold, but we must not normalize the situation. The other thing that has been really pointed out, and we can study from history and from, not just ancient history, but current circumstances, is that it's really important that we work really hard now. We don't want this government to get entrenched or get traction. So I would also really suggest to everyone that this is a time to really engage, not stand on the sidelines. I think the balance between our spiritual practice and coming from a really grounded place in understanding our relationship with Mother Earth, or whatever practices we have that we're close to, and that prayer is essential, prayer is important. But as a lot of the elders I've worked with have said to me, but meet the Creator halfway. Like, we also have to be active. And this is absolutely not a time to let other folks be doing the work. So, just some practical things, since you mentioned some of the word practicality. I can tell you a lot about the programs that we're doing at weekends, some trainings we're having up on democracy, reclaiming our democracy, and different ways that people can learn how to engage. Because for some people, this is the first time around really finding out, how do you call your Congress people? Where do you send letters to? How do you engage? Two things I would just mention that I think are really powerful things that have emerged from this time of the movements are, one, the Indivisible Guide. It's called the Indivisible Guide and the Indivisible Movement, which has really emerged. I think it's a fantastic toolkit that really teaches you very rapidly how to engage in government, how to engage in democracy. And I would really encourage folks to look that up. And there's groups of indivisible popping up everywhere across the country, and everyone can do it themselves. It's a very decentralized movement. Another really good one is Daily Action, and all of these you can look up online, Indivisible Guide, dailyaction.org, I think it is, about just helping people know what's happened each day and how they can engage in their democracy and calling their governments, or reaching out through postcards or what have you, and organizing with others. And it's been really successful. I'm sure a lot of folks have seen some of the videos that have come out from some of these town hall meetings where you see just incredible organization going on by everyday folks getting out there, letting their leaders know what it is that they're concerned about, but in a very organized way. And all of this has come out literally just since the beginning of the year, this level of organization. So I think in terms of what's inspiring and giving me hope is this incredible immune system, if you will, of Mother Earth that is rising up through our voices, through our actions, this amazing immune system of Mother Earth reacting to this assault on the web of life and this assault on our democracy. So we need to continue that. We need to engage many, many more folks. We need to understand we're in a long distance run, so we need to pace ourselves. We need to have good allies. I couldn't stress enough how important it is to work with your friends, to work with community, to create small circles that you can engage in on, a regular basis, because we cannot do this alone. We can't shoulder this kind of thing on our own. It's too big. And I think another thing that I think is really important about this moment is that we have an incredible opportunity to really practice what people are referring to as intersectional dynamics, meaning intersectional movement building, where we understand that Black Lives Matter, the climate justice movement, the immigration rights, workers' rights, women's rights, indigenous rights are deeply interwoven, that we are in fact all struggling against the same systems of oppression, and that we're going to need each other. So even though we're focusing on women and climate change and climate justice, we ensured that a lot of our community went out to the airports during the struggle around people and their immigration rights, and different rallies that were happening a few weeks ago across the country, saying, no, we need to get out there and support this community, even if it's not the first work we're doing. It's time to do that. And ensure that there is a lot of cross-sector support that goes on, and that we really work together, because we're going to have a big movement. We know that with what's going on here, not just in the United States, around the world, but to just take a step back and look at this larger lens, we have been living in patriarchal dominator societies for a very, very long time, thousands of years. This model of a dominator culture, society, civilization has been entrenched for a very long time. And we've had a lot of gains over the past years. We see the rise of women's leadership, the rise of the feminine. We're seeing incredible strides all over the world of women's rights. At the same time, we're seeing a huge pushback. We also are looking at the relationship between patriarchy at the root that has also developed into different forms of racism, colonization, and capitalism. And I see that all as stemming from this dominator worldview of men above women, humans above nature, white people above people of color. And this whole modality of a understanding of dominion over worldview has now come to an incredible head. And we're observing the fact that we are looking now at an existential crisis of having treated women and people of color and the earth basically as a resource to extract and use. And that has led to the current circumstance we're in. So I think we need to understand in this moment that we're seeing an incredible pushback, a life and death pushback from these old systems of thought, from this regime of domination and colonization. And I suppose it's not surprising that we would see this level of just stunning and violent pushback. And so it's going to take an enormous amount of collective movement building, education, advocacy, and a whole combination of strategies to really move us to where we need to go. And so I think the great hope lies in the beautiful power of people to stand up for what's right, to stand up for justice, to be courageous, to be able to risk, to be able to understand that no matter what we're doing in our lives, right now, us reclaiming our democracy and the rule of law and justice is got to be a priority for everyone.
Beautiful, so well spoken, thank you. And I was thinking about how it's so important for us to sustain the movement, like you said, just to underscore that. In order to do that, we need to be able to go in, take action, and be really clear about the actions that we're taking, and then go back into nature, get rejuvenated, reconnect to spirit, and then go back out again. And I heard a really beautiful metaphor that in a choir, when they're wanting to sustain a note over time, people will take breaks. And so one person will stop singing, but the note will continue because other people are holding the note, and then the other person will come in. So I think that that's something that if we learn to sustain the movement over time by keeping our connection to nature and to spirit, to not disconnect and go into fight mode, but to stay deeply, deeply connected. Can you talk a little bit, Osprey, about your relationship, WeCan's relationship with Standing Rock, and what has been going on in that context, and what we perhaps could do now around holding steady?
Yeah, sure, and I agree. I think that this is not easy work, and so having a spiritual practice is essential, whether it's meditation or being connected to Mother Earth. So I just wanted to echo that. I really wholeheartedly agree that there's a balance between being understanding the fight that we're in and caring for ourselves, which is not easy. And,
No.
I always am in dialogue about that myself, because in WeCan we deal a lot with frontline communities, and so there are plenty of urgent matters on a daily basis. And I want to talk about Standing Rock in a moment, but I just want to put Standing Rock in context, because I think it's very important, number one, to understand that this is an Indigenous-led movement to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And I want to emphasize the absolute importance of Indigenous peoples, not in only our country, but in countries around the world at this pivotal moment. Yes, we all have a role to play, and we're all important, and every human life is important, of course. And I think it's also important to understand that those who've been impacted first and worst by environmental racism and by these hierarchical, unfortunate situations we're in addition to women, we know that Indigenous women and our Indigenous allies and our women of color are at the bottom of the heap. And not only is that not, it also, portrays incredible injustice. We also need to understand that these voices are some of the most important voices to lift up, not only because they're being impacted first and worst, but because of the solutions and knowledge coming from the front lines that affects all of us. And one of the things that WeCan is doing this week, because March 8th is International Women's Day coming up now, we're putting out an article on honoring women, land, and human rights defenders, and particularly emphasizing a lot of women of color and Indigenous women who literally put their bodies on the line every single day to protect their own territories and communities, their forests, their water, their air. But what most people don't understand is that that's for all of us. About 80% of all the biodiversity left on Earth right now is in Indigenous lands. So when we're talking about Indigenous people standing up for the Amazon rainforest, standing up in Standing Rock, up at the tar sands in Canada, we also have a very strong project going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo at the Tombe rainforest. When those primarily Indigenous Black and brown bodies are on the line, we tend to see those folks. Well, those sisters and brothers of ours are doing that, and we need to remember that it's one Mother Earth ecosystem, one living system of life. And so when that water and that forest and that air is being protected, that's my body, my children, my family. So what is our role in defending the defenders of the land? What is our role in standing with our sisters and brothers who've been on the front lines a very long time? And hopefully a lot of those barriers are breaking down. And I think Standing Rock is an incredible example of a moment when a lot of those barriers had an opportunity to break down, and hopefully the movement will continue to grow in that way. So as I was saying, it is an Indigenous-led movement. I'm sure everyone knows, but in a nutshell, stopping the Dakota Access Pipeline from bringing an oil pipeline from the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota, right across the Missouri River, where it would affect and impact the Standing Rock Sioux Nation, and literally millions of people downstream if that pipeline were to break. So, it's been a very, very challenging, heartbreaking situation, as well as, to me, an incredible success. And, what I share here is really from a lot of my Indigenous allies who, could speak of this, more powerfully than any of us. So, I humbly present what I'm about to say, really in respect to a lot of our Indigenous allies from the Indigenous Environmental Network, Honor the Earth, and so many individuals, the Youth Council, the Indigenous Youth Council, that has been so strong up at Standing Rock. And this movement was started by the youth and women. And everyone there will let you know that the backbone of this movement is the women who've been really guiding this to protect, water is life. And so in terms of just the incredible vision that happened there of bringing together, the tribes across this country, over 500 tribes came together, as I understand it, not just from the United States, but from all over the world, to express solidarity. So there was a tremendous victory in Indigenous people, letting people know they've really, no matter what has happened in the camps right now, water is life. Miniwichoni went all over the world. We're talking millions of people around the world taking a moment back to say, wow, water is life. Miniwichoni, we can't live without water. That was a tremendous achievement, huge, and bringing people's attention to Indigenous rights and Indigenous sovereignty. So it's really key to remember that a big part of the struggle there was around Indigenous rights, around treaties that have been broken in this country since the founding of this country, and the fact that the Laramie Treaty was still not being respected, and the right to the tribes for their own sovereignty, their own decision making. And again, it comes back to an issue of environmental racism, in that the nearby town of Bismarck, which is primarily white people, was able to go to the Energy Transfer Company, go to the Environmental Protection Agency, go to the state and say, we don't want this pipeline coming through in our community, because if it breaks, it'll destroy our water. Why were they able to have the pipeline route changed to be near the Standing Rock Sioux and not be near Bismarck? That was not a problem. But when the Indigenous people stood up and said, hey, we don't want this breaking in our water either, it was suddenly a huge conflict. So again, I must bring forward this issue of environmental racism in this country, because we cannot talk about climate without talking about racism and many other issues, but we'll just start there, and women's rights as well. So anyway, this has been an incredible struggle that brought all these tribes together. I was up there 3 different times. Weekend brought several small delegations. We went up in the summer, we went up in the autumn, we went up right as the snows were coming. We did several things. One, we were producing a very in-depth report on women leaders from Standing Rock. We did an article that came out called 15 Indigenous Women at Standing Rock. I don't think that's the exact title, but it came out on EcoWatch, and it had a really great spread. And we wanted to, early on, this was in August, we had been hearing stories in the news, but no one had really lifted up the women who, as people there said, were the backbone of the movement. So we wanted to do a spread on women. So we did a deep interview series on the women there. It was just incredibly beautiful. And then we went up during some of the really heavy actions when things started getting a lot more violent. And then again, as the snows came in, just to continue the stories and to bring support. We brought supplies. We did a lot of fundraising, brought a lot of different funders to the table, and mostly just showing our solidarity by being there. And I was just so deeply moved by the balance, as we were talking about, between the spiritual and the practical. Just ceremonies almost every day, particularly before the snows came, and just so beautiful to see all of these actions led in prayer. As you know, there was no weapons, everyone was unarmed, and so the depth of the struggle coming out of prayer and love was beyond words. I can't even begin to tell you how powerful it was to experience the ancestors and the power of the movement and the history of why that particular land even was a place where all of this interaction happened. On the flip side, and everyone knows, we saw brutal violence, again, incredible racism and degradation of Indigenous rights, Indigenous people, people I'm incredibly close to. You know, I can't even tell you the horrors that they experienced, the violence, the mace, the dog biting, the rubber bullets that still wound you terribly, the woman who almost lost her arm, another woman who has lost sight in one eye, the level of brutality at the hands of state government and the corporations, the fossil fuel industry, is an atrocious crime. Over 700 people have been arrested, and all their cases are still, you know, processing through. It's going to take time. So I think it's really important, you know, that we learn the lessons of Standing Rock. We're still learning a lot. There's so much more to learn about the success being based in prayer, being based in our understanding of protecting the water. And so it's much, much more than a pipeline. A whole movement has come about, and people all over the world have become awakened to Indigenous rights, Indigenous sovereignty, and our need for collective action. So I think it was just absolutely tremendous, and the respect that we need to give to Indigenous peoples. I'm hoping, I know in our organization, we're rapidly now working on, you know, how do we lift up Indigenous rights and bring forth the power of that as a legal strategy in our country and in countries around the world, because I think it's one of the solutions that we need to honor. Today, you know, just bringing it up a little bit more, I'm sure people know that the camps have very unfortunately been raided and are closed in essence. There's been a lot of false narratives about that. And I don't want to go on and on. If people have questions, I'm glad to answer them. But the movement goes on. People have moved to other camps. The movement will continue. The fight to stop the pipeline is not over. There's still a lot more court work that can be done, legal work. More suits have been filed by different tribes within the Great Sioux Nation. There's divestment. People should continue to divest from Dakota Access Pipeline, from Energy Transfer Company, with the banks who are investing. And there's, you know, lists of them. You can go to our website and learn about them, so I don't bore people. But I still think divestment is a key component of this action. We're still involved in some high-level divestment issues ourselves to help banks divest. And I will also lastly say, you know, just for consideration through Standing Rock, but also other actions that are coming up across the country, is this question of personal risk. And to make a long story short, we were engaged with some of the leadership, some of the Indigenous leaders before Dakota Access Pipeline really grew amazingly, as it should, to the amazing movement that it is, in a Keep It in the Ground campaign, meaning keeping fossil fuels in the ground, during the Obama administration. And there had been a planned action in Washington, D.C. at the Department of the Interior to demand all fossil fuels on public lands not be exploited or extracted. And that all happened in early September, when things were really starting to amp up at Standing Rock. So we didn't want to end that action, and we changed it to be an action of keep fossil fuels in the ground, but also a demand to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. So our allies decided some of us should go there and represent Standing Rock and these other fossil fuel issues in Washington, D.C. So we did that, and 13 of us were arrested at the Department of the Interior for that action, for doing a sit-in. We were arrested by Homeland Security and went through the process of our court case and going through all the procedures of how to maneuver through the system around standing up for our rights and standing up for the land. And many, many people, as I said, over 700 people were arrested at Standing Rock. And I bring this issue up because I don't think everyone needs to get arrested. I don't think it's the only tool in our toolkit by far. But I do think that it's important to understand that, it's a time for us to ask ourselves, what are we willing to risk, and understand that it's important that we just don't have brown and black bodies on the line. And that if we're not willing to risk arrest, which is fine, how do we really support defenders of the land who are doing that? Because it is an important tool in our toolkit, as well as advocacy at many levels. And it's just something I think that it's important to mention because it's something that's going to accelerate. So anyways, that's sort of a short synopsis on a really big topic.
Thank you so much. And I just want to point out to everyone, obviously you can see how Osprey has tremendous wisdom, research, and that your organization, bless you so much for doing all the work that you've done. So we can all go and visit the We Can website to learn more information. It sounds like there's a lot of resources there as well. And I believe Will and Judith they had another engagement they had to go to. So if they're still around and Will wants to do first response, we can do that. But in the meantime, Osprey, I want to ask you, Earth Day is coming up. I know that you're gathering resources for that. So is there a way that we can plug in to help around these topics and specifically around Earth Day? What are you creating?
Yeah, great. Well, our organization's actually not doing anything specifically on Earth Day other than supporting the march. There's going to be a march of scientists in Washington, D.C., and I think it's fantastic. Scientists are out there marching on Earth Day to say science is real, and we need to invest in science, to administration that clearly doesn't believe in science. But I think the event that you're referring to is on April 29th, and this is planned for some time. The People's Climate Movement, or People's Climate March, is going to be having the main march in Washington, D.C., but it will also be with sister marches across the country. And it's really stemming from, if some of you might recall, in 2014, there was the big People's Climate March in New York, right before the United Nations General Assembly. And it was in the lead up to building momentum for the big Paris Climate Agreement. And it was to show governments that, and leaders that people really care about this issue, then it's urgent. And it was very successful. Over 400,000 people marched, largest climate march in the United States. So this is a follow-up march. It lands right at the 100-day mark of this new administration. And people from all over the country are coming to Washington, D.C. to march again for climate justice. Again, it will be an intersectional movement building opportunity for many different people from health and sciences to labor, to all come together to say, we want climate on the agenda. It is urgent. This has been the hottest year on record in 2016, and we're over 400 parts per million of carbon emissions in the atmosphere when we need to be at 350. I don't know how to stress that this is a life and death situation enough. We are out of time. We cannot afford to be going backwards. The biggest thing I'm saying is resist, and we're not going backwards. We have to absolutely move to a clean energy future immediately. So people are welcome to march in DC or in sister marches. And right now, our organization's bringing women together and men, because we have many men in our organization. We depend on the men in our organization as much as the women, to bring together a Women for Climate Justice Contingent. And we will be gathering there. We're having meetings, which you can find out on our website, how to join our meetings to learn how to gather for Women for Climate Justice through We Can. And we're very excited about that. We're also going to be having a big event after the march that evening, where we're bringing frontline women from around the country and different countries around the world, actually, to come and share their struggles and solutions at an event at the Impact Hub in DC that evening. So that's kind of the basics, and I hand it back to you.
Thank you. So we have a couple questions from the audience.
So I'm probably going to tear up, but I think that you're saying about what are you willing to risk? That's where I'm really stuck. Like, I keep coming up, it's easy to be alarmed, it's easy to be outraged, but I just keep coming back to, what are you willing to risk yourself? It's a place where I'm really stuck, and I could use some ideas to help get unstuck.
Well, thank you for asking that very brave question, because that's where it starts, is just asking that question. And, you know, I can just speak for myself personally and share a little bit of my journey, because I think that's the best way to share. But, you know, one thing is, I think that it's a very personal question, because everyone has different health issues and age issues and parenting issues. So we all don't need a cookie cutter version of what to risk, because truly we are very unique. And when risk involves our bodies, it really needs to be what we can do, because if we risk too much, then we're not helpful to the movement anyway. If we don't risk enough, then we're also not giving our all. So it's a balance of really individually finding out, what can I risk? I do think the question comes from the fact that we need to get out of our comfort zone and understand our relationship with what's at stake, and measure out, what am I willing to do? In other words, as I was mentioning earlier on the call, as a lot of our movement allies, pardon me, have told us, that we cannot let this government get entrenched. We cannot normalize the situation, and we need to move rapidly now. So for me, this is saying, okay, I need to risk more now. It's not like, well, let's kind of see how things, you know, turn out over the next year. It's like, no, climate change is urgent now. We can't let the EPA completely be destroyed and have our waterways destroyed. And, you know, they're already saying we can now put the pollution from mining coal into our streams. I mean, there's just no time to allow these things to happen. We weren't in a very good place to begin with. We can't afford to bring coal back on. We need to transition. So what am I willing to risk comes from also what's at stake and how serious everything is.
Right.
So I think it starts with, first, our physical well-being, our spiritual well-being, our emotional well-being, and understanding that this is a unique time. So what can we do that's more than we've been doing? You know, what are we willing to risk financially? Is it a time to go flat out? You know, when is it time to push everything we've got? When is it time to pull back? And as Heather was saying, you know, take a breath. So these are very individual questions, but I think it begins with first checking in with yourself and saying, you know, am I holding back because someone else is going to do it? Am I holding back because I live in suburban neighborhood and, you know, my water's good and I've got the food I want, and, you know, I'm not an immigrant and I'm not a person of color. So, you know, I'm doing pretty good. So we'll just, you know, click away on the internet and click on a few petitions. You know, can I get myself past that point? And that's where I think like groups like the Indivisible Guide, or joining some of the weekend calls, or other forms of action kind of warm you up to take some steps towards more activity. So you don't have to like go from, you know, here I am in my house to I'm going to go get arrested. So welcome you to do that. That would have the means and capacity and help to do it. But, you know, get warmed up by getting involved in these groups. You know, it's a process. I hope that's helpful to you.
It is. It's very helpful. It's just so confronting what you haven't risked, that it's easy to just get stalled in this guilt. I mean, I'm married to an immigrant who came here undocumented, and still, you know, there's so much that I haven't risked, and, you know, just kind of getting over, guilty is no good. That doesn't help anyone. Just, it's better just to move. And I like your suggestions very much.
Great. Yeah, no, guilt is, don't even have time for guilt. Just like take some action, go to some meetings. You can bypass guilt. Responsibility, yeah. Guilt, we don't need.
Right. That's self-indulgent. Well, thank you so much. That helps me a lot.
Thank you for your great question.
We had another question come through from Will. So the question, attending and presenting weekend at the 61st United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which is coming up. And if so, when?
I'm sorry, you broke up, so I didn't hear the whole question. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you'll be attending and presenting weekend at the 61st United Nations Commission for Women.
Okay, great, thank you. We do go to the Commission on Status of Women in the UN. I'm not sure we're going to this year because I'll tell you why. Right on the heels of that is the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And we're going to be hosting several events there. And this year we're putting a lot of our energy into the Indigenous women we're working with, because this is the 10th anniversary year of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So it's a big year to talk about some of the successes of that, but also, unfortunately, a lot of the violations against the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, having to do with Standing Rock communities we work with in the Amazon rainforest, and a lot of our allies who also are working with Indigenous peoples in these different communities where the violations have been really severe. And we want to make a really big deal of it. So we're going to be there in April, and then going up together to, or down rather, to DC to the March. So we've got a huge action week coming up. So I think we might be skipping the Commission on the Status of Women this year, but if people are in New York and go to some of the events, it is really an important time for women to gather.
Beautiful. And there's another gathering that Will mentioned, is there's a Grandmother's Circle of the Earth gathering, foundation gathering, the morning of March 15th. And so Sheila will repost that. And
great.
Us to know that these big gatherings that are happening, and these are places that we can plug in, even if we can't be there physically, that we can plug in with our hearts, that we can let other people know about it, that we can keep up to date. And we really got to see, as you were saying, Osprey, with Standing Rock, that here was a very local movement that was incredibly global, because of course it affects all of us. And I believe Standing Rock was a shift in consciousness of recognizing, of all of us beginning to recognize there is no local anymore, and that everything is connected. And it's been beautiful in some ways to watch the movement of activism transform from being this, like, I'm a feminist, or I'm a climate activist, or I'm working with racism, that this intersectionality now is crucial to recognize. Nothing is separate. We're all connected. It's always been that way. But now, as we're coming more and more to times where we really need to take action, that we recognize that, as you're saying, we can't be complacent. And that, something that drives me crazy is people are like, well, you're a white woman, you don't have any issues, you're fine. And I'm like, people, it's all connected. We all have to stay together in this, because there's none of us that are not touched by climate change or by racism or by any of the things that we're struggling for now. So I'm not saying that very gracefully, but I just feel like we're all in. We need to be all in around all of it, and do it in such a way that's sustainable as well. So really to keep honoring that. And we had another question that I just wanted to mention, which is from someone saying, as a white male, what do I do? And Osprey, you can respond to this as well, but I'll just say the same thing that everyone else is doing, that there's no difference. So we all get to stand up. And as you said so beautifully, Osprey, no guilt, just absolute, we're responsible for the planet, for standing up for what we believe in the best way possible. And that the more that we can own that from a connection to spirit and rejuvenate ourselves and listen and pray and act, the better. So let me just check if there's any more questions. Diane. Okay, so let's bring Diane on, and then we'll do the closing with Osprey, a final comment.
Just wanted to have an up note that Sultan and I from Palestine and I are at the 35th Annual Public Interest Environmental Law Conference at the University of Oregon. So there are, I don't know how many hundreds of people here. Some are lawyers, some are law students, some are little kids, some are, on every level, from the old hippies like me to the, kind of straight lawyers that are beginning to open up to environmental law and how to protect people. So same messages we're hearing here, very exciting, very devastating on one hand. On the other hand, it's very, very exciting that people are beginning to see that we're all connected, that the the environment's connected to women, connected to the military complex, and et cetera, et cetera. So just attesting to people coming together in really wonderful ways here in Oregon, at least. So thank you. Thanks for your sharing.
So good to see you. Thank you. And Osprey, final comments, thoughts, shares.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to also say that, certainly there's ample room for women and men alike. We run a women's organization because of the need to lift up women's voices. But as I said, it's not about putting men down, but about lifting women up. And I think for a lot of folks, it's a lot about education right now, getting educated about environmental racism, getting educated about climate change, getting educated about immigrant rights, getting educated about how our systems work. I can't tell how many more people are reading Hannah Arendt, who wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism. I think some of this, deep analysis is also really important for us to draw upon now of other governments and other countries that have dealt with this level of oppression and understand how deep it is so that we can have our strategies and actions match the depth of the complexity and dangers. So I think I would end on a note of, get educated, get tuned in, find your people so that you can strategize and work together and mobilize together. And yeah, take great hope in the sense that we are in a time of great awakening. This time has been prophesized. So many elders I've talked to from all over the world have shared with me their different stories of prophecy. And so there's, for me, a great deal of hope in the sense of this being a time of collective consciousness around this great choice humanity is taking. And I will say, there is no sure outcome. When we're talking about risk and what's at stake, I think we need to remember we're not in a Hollywood movie where the ending is assured. It truly is about my spirit, my heart, my mind, my every ounce of every living beingness I have, entering and engaging in the world, being very present, taking it all in, connecting with people, understanding that I'm a part of this journey. You are a part of this journey. We're going to need to do this together. And as long as we remember that this great awakening is happening and that we're participants in the outcome, I think this is a really good attitude to have and an approach to have. The thing we can't afford is for people to be complacent, to be on the sidelines, and to think somehow this is going to happen without you. This is about you. This is about me. This is about the web of life. This is about us being educated. This is about us taking action. This is about us understanding very complex issues, not relying on sound bites. But I would just say resist, engage, educate, love yourself, don't judge, jump in there and understand every step counts at this point. And it's been a pleasure to be with you all today. And thank you all for everything you're already doing. Thank you for all the work and love you already put out every day. I deeply appreciate it. And yeah, let's continue and stand in solidarity together.
Thank you so much, Osprey. It's really so powerful to talk about these incredibly difficult challenges that we're facing and the complexity as you're talking about, and also to feel this sense of hope and community. So thank you. For our next Global Wisdom Call, happening the first weekend of April, Saturday, and Sheila will post it, I'm sure, what, April 1st. Ooh, I love it. We're having Jennifer Knight, and Dan is going to play us a little video clip about that so you can see what's coming up.
Good afternoon, Global Wisdom community. My name is Jennifer Knight, and I'm excited to invite you to join me next month in April for our next Global Wisdom Call. We're going to explore together the topic of syntropy, which is a law of the universe that allows us to collaborate consciously with nature. We're going to talk about what this principle is, how it relates to living systems, and how we are uniquely wired in our heart center to be able to work with Centropy to create a beautiful future together. I look forward to it. Please join me. Thank you.
Beautiful. So thank you to everyone who joined us on the call today, for opening your hearts, for listening, for staying steady, and for all the ways that you have taken action and that you will take action going forward. And let's stay connected on the Global Wisdom, the Wisdom page. Let's talk about what we're doing and share our resources with each other. Again, much gratitude to Osprey. And let's just take a moment to close. If you can bring your attention to your heart and put one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly. And just say thank you to this amazing body that you have. That is part of nature, that was birthed from the soil, from the trees, from the air. And let's open our gratitude to honor each of the elements, air, fire, water, and earth, that are within us and that sustain us. And ask that we may listen more to the wisdom of the elements than to our old thoughts and beliefs. May we walk in beauty. May we take action from our hearts, from our passion. May we be fierce and gentle. May we let go of guilt so that we can take action from deep responsibility. And may we continue to support Indigenous peoples around the world and listen to their wisdom that is so needed at this time. Many blessings to each of you. Thank you for being who you are. And all of our love from the Wisdom community. Bye-bye.